Does releasing millions of balloons into the sky for charity sound like a good idea? A colorful celebration, a world record attempt, a feel-good moment for an entire city. But what could possibly go wrong? An airport shutting down, a major highway gridlocking, a massive cleanup operation, and a disaster that would be remembered for decades. This is the story of Balloon Fest '86, and how a simple fundraising stunt in Cleveland, Ohio, spiraled completely out of control. In 1986, the city of Cleveland wanted to change its image. It was struggling economically and wanted something big, something positive, to put it on the map. So the United Way of Cleveland came up with a bold idea: break the Guinness World Record for the largest balloon release ever. The target was enormous, nearly 2 million helium balloons. To make it happen, they built a massive net structure in downtown Cleveland's public square, stretching across an entire city block and rising several stories high. Inside that structure, around 1.4 to 1.5 million balloons were gradually filled with helium. The effort was powered by roughly 2,500 volunteers, many of them students, working for hours in assembly line conditions. To raise money, balloons were even sponsored, donations tied to how many were filled. After days of preparation, everything was ready, but nature was not cooperating. On the day of the event, weather conditions began to change. A strong rain system was moving toward downtown Cleveland, and this created a critical problem. If the balloons were released into wet, cold air, they wouldn't behave as expected. At that point, organizers faced a decision: delay the event, or proceed with a massive crowd already waiting. With thousands of spectators gathered and pressure building, they made the call to move forward early. At approximately 1:50 p.m., the net was released. For a few seconds, everything looked perfect. A wave of color erupted into the sky. Hundreds of thousands of people watched as millions of balloons rose above Cleveland, circling around landmarks like the Terminal Tower. It looked like a success. For a moment, it felt like history had been made. But that moment didn't last. As the balloons rose, they immediately ran into changing weather conditions. Cold air and heavy rain caused them to behave unpredictably. Instead of drifting upward and dispersing, many were pushed back downward or forced to fall much sooner than expected. What was supposed to be a harmless sky release became something far more chaotic. Balloons began returning to the ground in massive quantities, and then the problems started. Airport disruption. Cleveland's Burke Lakefront Airport experienced significant interference, with balloon coverage affecting visibility and forcing temporary disruptions to operations. Road chaos. Highways and streets were suddenly filled with floating latex balloons. Drivers struggled with reduced visibility and distraction as the city was overwhelmed by drifting debris. Traffic slowed. In some areas, movement nearly stopped entirely. Lake Erie contamination. Winds pushed large quantities of balloons into Lake Erie, and it was here that the Balloon Fest stunt claimed its most devastating price. During the event, 2 men had fallen from their boat into the lake and were missing. The Coast Guard launched a rescue operation, but as the helicopters approached the search area, they were met by a scene of utter chaos. The water was choked with thousands upon thousands of drifting balloons. Rescuers were physically blinded, unable to distinguish a human head from a floating orange dot. The noise of the helicopter rotors churned the balloons into a swirling latex soup, making visual search impossible. By the time the massive balloon blockade finally cleared, the men were found drowned. Their families later sued the organizers for millions, a heartbreaking loss of life that turned the celebratory stunt into a permanent tragedy. And while they technically achieved their goal of setting a world record, the cost of the cleanup, the immense disruption, the legal fallout, and the ultimate, devastating loss of life erased any intended benefit. In fact, the disaster was so legendary that Guinness eventually stopped measuring mass balloon releases altogether. Balloon Fest '86 was supposed to be a symbol of optimism, a city trying to reinvent itself, a record-breaking celebration of unity and joy. Instead, it became a cautionary tale, a dark, defining moment in Cleveland's history.